So now, let's go to Ali Sheridan to hear about fossil fuel subsidies. What are fossil fuel subsidies?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you at this year's Climate and Nature Summit. And I just want to say a really well done to each of you for coming along to this event and leaning into what can sometimes be quite overwhelming issues, but as we're seeing, such hugely important ones. So we all know fossil fuels are a major driver of climate change, but today I want to talk to you about fossil fuel subsidies. What are they? Why are they used? Some of the issues they're causing as we strive to move towards a more sustainable society. So fossil fuel subsidies are essentially a tool that are used to give more preferential tax treatment to fossil fuels. And they show up in lots of different ways, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. They can be through the application of a tax incentive.
I hope you're not getting lost. What is a tax incentive? It encourages a particular economic activity. Economic activity? Basically a business. So it might encourage fossil fuel companies to extract fossil fuels and burn them by reducing tax payments for those companies. So essentially, tax incentives mean they pay less tax to keep their business going.
Or through the not applying of a tax to certain fossil fuels or its uses. Subsidies sometimes apply to the production of fossil fuels and other times to the consumption. So they're applied to lots of different types of fossil fuels and uses. So for example, in road transport fuels, in jet kerosene for airplanes, diesel for ships, the fossil fuels that are used in manufacturing, such as fertilizer production, and in some heating and electricity uses as well. So while some might argue that subsidies are necessary to help ensure energy security, to help keep costs manageable, to help industries to innovate, to grow.
So governments give out subsidies, and these are just tax breaks or incentives. So essentially companies have to pay less tax. Why? Well, it helps the companies to keep costs down. It helps them to innovate and grow, and it helps to keep costs manageable. It also helps to ensure that we have energy security so that essentially we don't have any blackouts.
There is a huge environmental cost associated with these subsidies that is not being accounted for. Indeed, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, found that not a single country is pricing its fossil fuels sufficiently in a way that reflects their full environmental costs, and that through encouraging the use of more fossil fuels or simply adding fuel to the fire of the climate crisis at a time where we so urgently need to reduce emissions. And the amount that the fossil fuel industry has been subsidised is nothing short of eye-watering. Globally, the IMF has identified that the production and burning of coal, of oil and gas was subsidised by $5.9 trillion in 2020. In the EU, total fossil fuel subsidies came to $176 billion in 2019, according to the European Commission. And here at home, according to the latest data from the CSO, total fossil fuel subsidies 2020 were $2.2 billion. While this was a small reduction from the previous year, this was more due to the downturn in activity because of COVID, so less driving, less flying, rather than any targeted move away from fossil fuel subsidies. And indeed, the latest data shows that energy from fossil fuels is still subsidised to a far, far greater level than subsidies for clean energy.
Fossil fuel subsidies. Tricky topic. Let's see what your understanding is like and what your opinions in the class are at this particular stage. So I want you to put your hand up in the air if you agree with the statement, and I'll give you maybe 5 seconds to do that after I read out the sentence. And if your teacher wants to stop and discuss why you have your hand up, you can do that. But if you don't have time, you can continue on. So, first statement. If governments stopped subsidizing fossil fuels, the fossil fuel industry would not continue extracting more fossil fuels. 5 seconds to think about that. If you agree with that statement, put your hand up. If you don't, keep it down. Okay, I'd love to be in the classroom to see you right now and see what your opinions are. Stopping subsidies would mean higher petrol prices, electricity prices, and manufacturing costs, which would result in a higher cost of living. This would make the public consume less energy and products. So essentially, if we stop subsidies, it would mean a higher cost of living until we transition to renewable energies. But this would make the public actually consume less energy and products because it costs more money. Hands up if you agree with that. Okay, next one. Stopping subsidies would help address the climate crisis and give us a better chance of obtaining a livable future. Put your hands up if you agree with that statement. Okay, last one. Governments should stop subsidizing fossil fuels. Okay, let's move on.
So at the moment, Ireland, like most countries, are in the midst of multiple crises. We have a cost of living crisis, an energy crisis intensified by the invasion of Ukraine, and all of that happening within the context of the larger climate and biodiversity crises. And we're seeing the impact of all this reflected in our escalating energy bills, the rising cost of living, inflation, both for consumers and for downstream industries. But at the same time as we're seeing more and more households struggle to make ends meet, we continue to see large fossil fuel companies making enormous profits. In the last few weeks alone, we have seen 11-figure profits posted for the second quarter of 2022. From the fossil fuel industry's point of view, they might argue that they need these profits to invest in the renewables that we need to shift to.
In 2018, what percentage of the fossil fuel industry budget went to green energy? Give me a percent between 0 and 100. Shout it out. You've got 5 seconds.
However, in 2018, for example, we saw just 1% of fossil fuel companies' budgets went to green energy. At the same time, despite maybe messaging around climate and sustainability ambitions and sustainability strategies, we see fossil fuel companies spending nearly 200 million a year lobbying to delay, to dilute, sometimes to block policies designed to drive climate action. Clear more than ever, we need a rapid move to renewables. And increasingly and positively, studies show us that technologies like solar, like wind, are cost competitive and scalable. But even given their cost competitiveness, the shift isn't happening quick enough. And a big part of that is due to the ongoing tax break and subsidies that are essentially distorting the market. So if we're going to move forward at the pace and the scale we need to relook at fossil fuel subsidies and change what it is we are incentivising. Through the removal of fossil fuel subsidies, along with right incentive measures, we can fund a large-scale shift to renewable, give clarity to industries that they need to move faster away from fossil fuels, and also raise much-needed funds for actions to reduce emissions, to help us adapt to climate change, and to repair the damage we have already done. While it might not always feel like it, Ireland is a wealthy nation that punches above our weight when it comes to emissions. In 2019, we declared climate and biodiversity emergency. Yet for all our talk, our emissions continue to rise, biodiversity continues to decline, and we are not moving anywhere fast enough. But we can turn things around. If we think about stopping supporting the fossil fuel industry and other industries to pollute through the use of subsidies, and instead use those funds to invest in actual solutions, in innovation, in the communities and regions that need the most support, we can create a fairer and livable planet for us all, because that is what is at stake. But it's not going to happen by itself. We all need to make our leaders aware that we want to see change when it comes to fossil fuel subsidies. We can write to our European MPs, our local TDs and councillors. We can support local and international campaigns to move away from fossil fuels and the use of subsidies. We can use our vote to back the most ambitious politicians. We can organise ourselves around our professions and add a more diverse range of voices calling for climate action, other than just the usual groups that have had to carry this workload alone for far too long. So in a world whose climate is breaking down, it is madness that we are actively paying for its further destruction through fossil fuel subsidies. We each need to find the courage now to speak up and act, because we are fighting for our futures. Thank you for taking the time to join me today, and keep up the good fight.
So, to finish up, we're going to have a walking debate, and we're going to answer that question: are we paying big companies to kill us? There are 5 statements. The left side of the room, at the wall, is strongly agree. The right side of the room is strongly disagree, and in the middle it's neutral. So you're going to have to stand up and you're going to have to move to the area that you agree or disagree with that statement. And you're going to have to be able to explain why you were there. So I'm going to play the 5 statements now, and your teacher is going to have those conversations with you and ask you why you're standing there. So after every statement, perhaps your teacher can pause the video. First statement: the fossil fuel industry are only a small part of the global warming problem. You can pause the video now, go to agree, disagree, neutral, and explain why you're there. Second statement: we must stop burning fossil fuels. Third statement: CEOs of fossil fuel companies should go to prison for purposely lying to the public. Fourth statement: your opinion is not your own, it's the media's opinion. Last statement: we are paying big companies to kill us. Really interested to hear your thoughts. Perhaps put them on Twitter, social media, on Instagram, using the hashtag Climate Nature Summit or hashtag Educational Revolution. Thank you so much for being part of this session.